The boy's fever was still climbing when the fifth royal healer pressed her palms flat against her thighs and stepped away from his bed. She said nothing. She didn't have to. The silence told the whole court everything. 5 healers, the best 5 the Silver Ridge Kingdom had ever produced. 5 women with decades of study between them, with potions older than the palace walls, with hands that had pulled warriors back from the edge of death more times than anyone could count. All 5 of them had walked into that room. All 5 of them had walked out. And in that carved stone bed, beneath sheets soaked through with sweat, the Alpha's only son, 6 years old, small enough to break your heart just by existing, lay with his chest rising too fast and his eyes closed too tight, his small fingers curled around nothing. Emmett Voss, Alpha of Silver Ridge, stood at the foot of that bed and stared at his son's face. He had not slept in 4 days. He had not eaten since the morning the fever started. His beta, Harlan Finch, stood behind him with both hands clasped together and his mouth pressed into a hard, silent line. Everyone in the room was silent. Everyone in the room was afraid. Because if the heir died, everything changed. And Emmett Voss, a man who had faced rogue pacts and border wars and council betrayals without flinching even once, looked like something inside him had already broken. The 5th healer, a woman named Lorna McGraw, cleared her throat near the door. Her voice came out soft and careful, the way voices do when people are bracing for impact. "Alpha Voss," she said, "we have tried everything within our knowledge. The fever is not natural. It is not responding to anything we know." Emmett did not turn to look at her. "Then find what you don't know," he said. Lorna McGraw closed her eyes briefly. "Sir, there is one more possibility, a formula, an old one. The records say it was developed in this very palace perhaps 15 years ago by a kitchen girl who—" "No." The word landed like a stone, dropped from a great height. Harlan Finch shifted his weight. "Emmett." "I said no." Emmett's voice had not risen. It never rose. That was what made it worse. "That girl is not to be mentioned in this palace. She is not to be mentioned to me. Find another way." Lorna McGraw looked at Harlan Finch. Harlan Finch looked at his hands. And in the bed the boy's breathing hitched, one short, struggling catch of air, and then smoothed again. But it was getting worse. Everyone in that room knew it. Everyone in that room knew there was no other way. And no one was brave enough to say the name that could save the child's life. Not yet. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you are already hooked and you need to know how this story ends, click subscribe and drop a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from. I will be back with another story just as gripping as this one. Now, let us begin. The Silver Ridge Palace was beautiful in the way that power always is, in a way that made you feel small just by looking at it. Its towers rose at the edge of a mountain valley, carved from pale gray stone that caught the morning light and held it like a secret. Inside, every hallway was wide enough for 10 wolves walking shoulder to shoulder. Every ceiling was high enough that sound got lost on its way up. The great hall had windows the length of 2 men standing, and when the sun came through them in the early afternoon, the whole room blazed gold, and for 1 perfect hour every day it looked like something out of a dream. No one who lived in the kitchen quarters noticed the light. The kitchen quarters were 2 floors below the great hall, dug into the rock of the mountain itself. There were no windows there. There was heat from the fires, and the smell of bread and roasting meat, and the sound of iron pots ringing against stone floors. There were the older kitchen women with their rough hands and tired faces, and there were the younger girls who had been placed there at the Alpha's discretion. Girls from families that owed debts to the pack, or girls with no families at all, or girls who had simply been in the wrong place when someone in authority needed a body to fill a post. Winnie Cross had been 14 years old when they brought her to Silver Ridge. She was the daughter of a healer, a real one, a village healer named Mabel Cross, who had served 3 packs in the mountains before a fever took her one winter, and left Winnie with nothing but a leather satchel full of dried herbs, and a memory so sharp it sometimes hurt. Her mother had taught her everything. Not the formal way, not with textbooks and certification seals. The way a river teaches the riverbank, slowly, persistently, over years, shaping her without her realizing how much had already taken hold. Mabel Cross had believed in the land's medicine. She had believed that every illness had a match somewhere in the natural world, and that the healer's job was not to overpower the body, but to give it what it had lost. Winnie had listened. Winnie had memorized. And at 14, with her mother 3 months in the ground and no one to vouch for her worth, she had ended up in the Silver Ridge kitchen, where her knowledge of plants and roots and bark preparations was treated as a curiosity at best and an irritation at most. "You can use what you know to flavor the stews," the head kitchen woman, a wide-shouldered woman named Deborah Turlow, had told her on her first day. "Other than that, keep your remedies to yourself. The palace has real healers for that." Winnie had nodded and said nothing. She had learned early on that saying nothing was often the wisest response available to her. For 3 years she worked in those kitchens. She learned the palace rhythms: when the alpha rose, when the council met, when the pack's mood shifted from settled to tense and back again. She kept her head down and her hands busy. She flavored the stews. She scrubbed the pots. She stayed in the places she was assigned to stay. And in the small hours of the night, when the kitchen fires burned low and the other girls were asleep, she sat by the hearth and read from her mother's notes. She experimented with what she could find. She made small preparations in clay cups and tested them on herself when she was ill, or on the older women who came to her quietly, embarrassed, when the palace healers had dismissed their complaints as too minor to attend to. She never asked for anything in return. She never drew attention to what she was doing. She was, by every outward measure, simply a kitchen girl with a talent for herb-seasoned bread and absolutely nothing else worth noticing. That was how she had survived 3 years without being seen. She did not know that she had, in fact, been seen. Just not in any way that would help her. The morning that changed everything began the way bad mornings often do, quietly, without any outward sign that the world was about to become unrecognizable. Winnie was at the long prep table before dawn, sorting dried herbs by scent, her fingers moving through the bundles with practiced certainty. The kitchen was not yet fully lit. 2 candles on the near wall gave her just enough to work by. She heard the door. She did not look up immediately, because that door opened and closed 40 times before breakfast on any given morning, and turning to look at every entry was a habit she'd trained herself out of years ago. But then she heard the voice, and that she couldn't ignore. "Which one is she?" The voice was low, male, the kind of voice that came with authority, not because it was loud, but because it had never once expected not to be listened to. Deborah Turlow's response was quick and a little breathless. "The girl at the far table, sir, the one with the herbs." Winnie set down the bundle in her hand. She turned. The man standing in the doorway was not Alpha Emmett Voss. She knew the Alpha's face from the rare times he passed through the palace corridors, a tall man, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and the kind of face that had been cut into hard lines by responsibility. This man was not him. This was his beta, Harlan Finch. She knew him by his pack mark, the silver-edged scar at the side of his neck, the beta's seal. He was perhaps 35, lean in the way that people who think constantly tend to be, with gray beginning at his temples and eyes that missed very little. He was looking directly at her. "You are Winnie Cross," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said. "Your mother was Mabel Cross, the mountain healer." Something tightened in her chest at the sound of her mother's name in this man's mouth. "Yes." Harlan Finch studied her for a moment. She had the strange sensation of being measured, not her appearance, but something else. Something harder to name. "The Alpha's son is ill," he said. "He has been ill for 4 days. 5 healers have attended him. None have found a treatment." The kitchen had gone completely silent. Every other girl at the tables was very still, the way small animals go still when something large moves nearby. Winnie said carefully, "I'm sorry to hear that." "There is a record," Harlan continued, "in the palace's old books, a preparation developed 8 years ago by a kitchen apprentice. The record doesn't carry the formula, only the result, but the librarian traced the entry back to you." Winnie's hands, still resting on the table, did not move. She had developed that preparation when she was 15. It was for mountain fever, a specific kind of fever that the standard remedies never touched because they treated the symptom rather than the source. She had tested it 3 times on herself and twice on an older kitchen woman who had nearly died the previous winter of exactly that kind of fever and recovered completely within a week. She had written it down in the kitchen's old supply ledger because she had nowhere else to write it, and because she had been young enough to believe it might matter to someone someday. She had not imagined this. "What is the nature of the fever?" she asked. Harlan Finch blinked. He had clearly not expected a direct clinical question. "High, constant, not responding to cooling or standard fever remedies. The healers say it is not natural in origin." "What does the breathing sound like?" "Rapid, short." "Is there a rash?" A pause along the sides. "Yes." Winnie's jaw tightened. She knew what that was. She had known what it was from the moment he said the fever did not respond to standard treatment, but she had needed the rest of the picture to be certain. She said, "I can help him." The words came out before she'd fully decided to say them. Harlan Finch looked at her for a long, careful moment. "The Alpha will need to agree." "Then take me to him." The walk through the palace to the Alpha's private chambers was the longest walk of Winnie Cross's life. Not because she was afraid. She was afraid she could feel it in the slight unsteadiness of her own hands, in the way her breathing wanted to go shallow, but fear had never been the thing that stopped her. Her mother had told her once, "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision that something matters more." The boy mattered more. She had not met him. She did not know his name yet, though she would learn it soon. Cody Voss, 6 years old, named for his grandfather. She knew only that he existed, that he was a child, and that children did not deserve to die of fevers that had a cure. That was enough. Harlan Finch walked 2 steps ahead of her and said nothing along the way. The palace guards watched her pass with expressions ranging from puzzlement to thinly veiled disdain. She was in her work clothes, a plain gray dress, flowers still on her forearm from the morning's bread, hair pulled back in a practical knot. She looked exactly like what she was, a kitchen girl walking through halls that were not built for her. She kept her spine straight. She had learned that much at least. The door to the Alpha's chambers was open. 2 guards stood on either side of it. Through the doorway she could see the sick room beyond, a room larger than the entire kitchen quarters, with stone walls softened by tapestries and morning light coming through one high, narrow window. And at the foot of the carved bed, standing with his back to the door, was Emmett Voss. Harlan Finch said quietly, "Alpha, the kitchen girl is here." Emmett Voss turned. Winnie had seen him from a distance before. Up close, the impression of hardness was even stronger, but it was a different kind of hard than she had expected. Not cold, worn. The way stone gets worn by water, shaped by something ongoing, something relentless. His eyes were dark and very direct, and for one moment they moved over her with an expression she couldn't fully read, assessing. Yes, but underneath it's something that looked almost like pain being held very carefully in check. Then the expression closed. "You're the kitchen girl," he said. "Yes, Alpha, Winnie Cross. Finch says you believe you can treat my son." I believe I can, yes. He studied her the way Harlan had, but with a different quality to it, less like being measured and more like being tested for something she hadn't been told she was being tested for. 5 healers, he said, trained, certified, more than 40 years of combined experience between them, and none of them could. With respect, Alpha Voss, I am aware. What makes you believe a kitchen girl can do what they cannot? It was a fair question. It was also a pointed one, and she heard both things clearly. She said, because what your son has is not something the standard training covers. It is a mountain fever variant. I have seen it twice. I have treated it twice, successfully. The healers are looking for a disease their textbooks name. I know the disease they cannot find in their textbooks. Silence. She did not fill it. Emmett Voss crossed the room in 3 long strides and stood in front of her. He was significantly taller than she was. She had to raise her chin to meet his eyes, and she did it without hesitating. If you are wrong, he said softly, my son dies. If I do nothing, she said, your son dies anyway. The breathing has already shortened. You have 2 days, possibly 3. I need to start tonight. Something moved in his face, there and gone, quickly controlled. What do you need? He said. She was given access to the palace herb stores. She was given a worktable set up in the antechamber adjacent to the sick room. She was given candles and clean water, and whatever she asked for from the kitchen without question. What she was not given was welcome. The 5 royal healers had not left. Lorna McGraw and her 4 colleagues, Pearl Haskins, Maybelle Bonner, Clara Doolin, and Leona Finch, no relation to the beta, had taken up a kind of vigil in the corridor outside the sick room, and they watched Winnie's arrival with expressions she felt even without looking directly at them. Pearl Haskins said something low to Maybelle Bonner. Maybelle Bonner looked at the worktable with its array of herbs and clay vessels and pressed her lips together. Clara Doolin, the eldest of the 5, was the one who approached. We have assessed the boy thoroughly, she said. Her voice was not unkind, but it was firm. Whatever you believe you can offer, I want you to understand that we have ruled out the standard approaches already. Winnie looked up from the herbs she was sorting. I am not using standard approaches. What are you using? A preparation based on black mountain root and 3 companion herbs, slow brewed, applied in stages. Clara Doolin's expression shifted slightly. Black mountain root is contraindicated for children under 10. It can thin the blood. In isolation, with the companion herbs, the reaction is different. The root opens the fever pathway while the companion herbs stabilize the blood response. I have used it on children, she paused. Successfully. Clara Doolin was quiet for a moment. You are a kitchen girl, she said. Yes, Winnie said, I know. She turned back to her work. Lorna McGraw appeared at Clara Doolin's shoulder. Alpha Voss is a reasonable man, she murmured. He's desperate, but if this fails, it won't go well for you. Winnie's hands were very steady on the herbs. I know that too, she said. She worked through the night. Alpha Emmett Voss did not sleep while she worked. He sat in a chair at the foot of his son's bed, and he watched the boy breathe, and he listened to the sounds coming from the antechamber, the quiet scrape of tools, the low, steady sound of something simmering, the occasional soft movement as Winnie Cross went about what she was doing with a focus so complete it was its own kind of silence. He did not know what to make of her. He knew the name, Cross. He knew the record in the ledger that Harlan had found. He had not known what to expect when Finch brought her up from the kitchens. Something nervous, probably. Something eager to please in the way that people were when they had been placed somewhere low for long enough. That was not what had come through his door. She had looked him in the face and told him his son had 2 days to live with a steadiness that was not bravado. It was something different, something that came from knowing something true and simply saying it. He found, to his discomfort, that he could not stop thinking about her face. He was a man who prided himself on not being distracted from what mattered. And what mattered right now, the only thing that mattered in any direction, was the small struggling form in that bed. But in the long, quiet hours of the night, with his son's breathing as the only sound and the soft candlelight from the antechamber drawing a line of gold under the door, his mind kept returning to the way she had raised her chin to look at him. The way she had said, "If I do nothing, your son dies anyway." He had not been spoken to like that in a very long time. He told himself it was irrelevant. He went back to watching his son breathe. The first dose was given at dawn. Winnie carried the small clay cup into the sick room herself. She had expected to be stopped by Emmett Voss, or by the healers hovering in the corridor, or by some instinct in the guards at the door. No one stopped her. Emmett rose from his chair when she entered. He looked at the cup in her hands and then at her face, and his expression was unreadable. "How is it given?" he asked. "Small sips every few minutes. I need him conscious enough to swallow." Emmett crossed to the bed and gently, with a tenderness that was startling in a man that large, lifted his son's shoulders. "Cody," he said softly, "Cody, you need to wake up a little." The boy's eyes opened, fever-bright, unfocused but present. Winnie sat on the edge of the bed and began the process. Small sips, careful intervals. She watched the boy's face and her own lips moved slightly, counting, tracking, reading the signals she had learned to read from years of paying close attention to how the body spoke. The boy was looking at her. Small children in fever did not always understand where they were, but something in them often responded to presence, to calm, to focused attention. Cody Voss's feverish eyes moved across her face as if he was trying to place her. "You smell like the kitchen," he said. His voice was hoarse and barely there. Winnie almost smiled. "I work in the kitchen," she said. "I make bread." "I like bread." "Good, you'll get some when you're better." "Promise." She held his gaze. "Promise." Emmett Voss, standing at the head of the bed with his hand on his son's shoulder, was very still. The improvement was not immediate. Nothing real ever was. But by late afternoon the fever had not climbed further. That was the first sign. The healers had told Emmett it would keep climbing. It had not climbed. It had held. Pearl Haskins came to check the boy midday and left without saying anything to Winnie. Clara Doolin came in the evening and stood at the bedside for a long time, watching the boy sleep, watching the slight regularity that had returned to his breathing. She looked at Winnie. She said nothing, but when she left she did not say anything dismissive either. Mabel Bonner was less quiet. She found Winnie in the antechamber preparing the second dose for the evening, and she said, not cruelly, but not kindly, "You know that a single day of stability doesn't prove anything. He could still decline." "He could," Winnie agreed. "We had him stable for half a day twice before. The fever pathway is still open. I'm watching for the shift. It will come in the next 12 hours. Mabel Bonner looked at the herbs on the work table. "Where did you learn this?" "My mother," a pause. "She was a mountain healer." "Mabel Cross." Mabel's voice shifted, something surprised in it. "I knew of her. She presented her mountain fever research at the regional healers gathering 15 years ago. They thanked her politely and filed it under traditional remedies." Winnie said nothing. "You're her daughter," Mabel said more softly. "Yes." A silence. "I'm sorry," Mabel Bonner said. Winnie wasn't entirely sure what she was apologizing for. There were several options. "Second dose in an hour," Winnie said. "He needs to be sitting up for it." It was Emmett Voss who helped her administer that dose. He had not left the sick room for more than minutes at a time over the past 2 days. Harlan Finch had come twice to bring him food, actual food, not the forgettable eating of a man going through motions, and both times Emmett had eaten mechanically, eyes still on the bed, before setting the plate aside. This time, when Winnie came in with the evening dose, Emmett was awake and standing at the window. The moon was full, and the valley below the palace caught its light and held it in the grass like scattered silver. He turned when she entered. "He's resting better," Winnie said. "I noticed." She moved to the bedside and began the careful work of rousing the boy enough to drink. Emmett came to the other side of the bed without being asked and sat, lifting his son's shoulders the same way he had that morning, with that careful, startling tenderness. They worked across the sleeping boy's body in silence, small sips, careful intervals. The moon through the window laid a stripe of light across the stone floor. At some point, Emmett said quietly, "How long have you been in the kitchens?" 3 years. You were 14 when you came. Yes. That's young to be taken from home. She glanced at him. His eyes were on his son. The question had not been a careful one. It had come out the way things do when a person's defenses are genuinely down, when exhaustion has filed off the edges. "There was no home left," she said. "My mother died, the kitchens were offered." He was quiet. "It wasn't unkind," she added, because something in her didn't want him to feel responsible. "Deborah Turlow runs a fair kitchen." "You should have been in a healer's study," he said, "not a kitchen." The words landed in an unexpected place, somewhere behind her ribs. She covered the boy back up to his chin and stood. "Second dose is done. The fever should break in the next 6 hours. When it does, it will come down hard, he'll sweat through everything, and he'll be weak for a day after. Let him sleep. Don't be alarmed by the sweating. It's the fever leaving." She started for the antechamber. "Winnie." She stopped. She turned. He was still sitting on the edge of the bed, one large hand resting near his son's shoulder. In the moonlight, the hard lines of his face were softer. Not soft. Nothing about Emmett Voss would ever be quite soft, but less braced. More present. "Thank you," he said, just that. 2 words, but they were real. She said, "He's going to be all right." And she left before the warmth in her chest could turn into something she didn't know how to manage. The fever broke at 2 in the morning. Winnie was still awake in the antechamber when she heard it, heard the change in the quality of the silence from the sick room, the way it softened, the absence of that strained, held quality that sick rooms had when everyone inside them was braced for the worst. She went in. Cody Voss was soaked through, exactly as she had predicted. Emmett had already stripped the sheets and was in the process of gently changing his son into dry clothes with a competence that suggested he had not always had staff to do these things for him, or that he had refused their help tonight. The boy was cool to the touch. Not cold, cool. The normal cool of a sleeping child who had just spent 4 days fighting something exhausting and had come out the other side. Winnie put the back of her hand to his forehead. She closed her eyes for one moment. "He's through," she said. Emmett didn't say anything immediately. He finished tucking the clean blanket around his son's sleeping form, and then he sat back in the chair and put his face in his hands, and the sound he made was small and quickly controlled, but she heard it. She was careful not to look. She busied herself with straightening the antechamber, giving him the privacy of those few seconds, understanding without needing it explained that a man like Emmett Voss would not easily forgive being witnessed in a crack of relief that large. When she came back through, he was composed. "He'll need broth in the morning," she said. "No solid food for 2 days. Keep him warm. If the fever returns, which it won't, but if it does, send for me immediately." Emmett nodded. "I'll go back to the kitchens," she said. "Deborah will be starting breakfast preparation soon. She'll need me." Something moved in his expression. "You haven't slept." "I've slept in shorter windows," she almost smiled. "Kitchen starts early." He stood. He was looking at her with that quality again, direct, careful, and underneath it something she could not entirely name. "I will speak to Finch," he said, "about your situation in the palace. You should not be, he paused, started again. Your skills are not kitchen skills. They should be recognized appropriately. She didn't know what to do with that. She said, You're very kind, Alpha Voss. Emmett, he said. She blinked. My son will want to thank you when he's well enough, he said. And I find I am not interested in being Alpha Voss in this room tonight. Not after this. He gestured at the room, at the sleeping child, at everything the past 12 hours had been. She looked at him for a moment. Emmett, she said. It was just a name, one quiet word, but she felt it go through her like the first note of a song she hadn't known she'd been waiting to hear. Good night, she said. Get some sleep, he'll be fine. She left. In the corridor, alone, she pressed one hand briefly to her sternum and told herself very firmly that she was simply tired. The days that followed were the kind that stayed in the memory not because large things happened, but because small things did. Cody Voss recovered with the easy, complete resilience of small children who throw themselves into illness with the same totality they bring to everything else, and then bounce out the other side as if they have simply reset. By the second day, he was asking for bread. By the third, he was asking if the kitchen girl could come back. Emmett came to the kitchen himself to tell her. He had never come to the kitchen in the 3 years Winnie had been there. She knew this because Deborah Turlow's face when he appeared in the doorway was a portrait of pure astonishment, followed by a rapid and uncertain courtesy. The other kitchen girls went very still. Emmett looked past all of them at Winnie, who was at the bread table and was, unfortunately for her composure, covered in flour up to the elbows. Cody is asking for you, he said. Winnie wiped her hands on her apron. I'll come up after the morning round. He's 6, Emmett said. He's not patient. She almost laughed. The sound almost escaped before she caught it. 10 minutes, she said. Let me get the bread in the oven or Deborah will never forgive me. Deborah Turlow, who would absolutely have forgiven her immediately and thoroughly under these circumstances, made no sound. Emmett Voss, Alpha of Silver Ridge, stood in the kitchen doorway and waited while a flour-covered kitchen girl finished loading bread into an oven, and when she finally came to the door and pulled off her apron, he fell into step beside her in the corridor as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The kitchen girls talked about nothing else for 3 days. Cody was delightful. This was not something Winnie had expected, though she supposed she should have. Children who were genuinely loved tended to be. He had his father's dark hair and directness, and he had something else that Emmett didn't, an immediate, uncomplicated openness, a readiness to be interested in things. He was interested in Winnie. He asked her 17 questions in the first visit, ranging from what does the medicine taste like when you make it to can you make someone taste different colors to do you have a wolf. On the last question, her expression must have shifted, because he caught it immediately with the alarming perceptiveness of small children and said, Sorry, I shouldn't have asked that. It's all right, she said. Papa said you saved my life. She glanced at Emmett, who was leaning against the wall near the window with his arms crossed, watching his son with an expression that made something in her chest do something she couldn't afford. The medicine saved your life, she said. I just made it. Cody considered this. That's the same thing, though. Is it? If you didn't make it, the medicine wouldn't be there. So you made it, so you saved my life. He looked at her with perfect 6-year-old certainty. That's how it works. She sat with that for a moment. Then she said, Fair point. He grinned. He was missing one of his front teeth. She stayed for an hour. She went back the next day, and the day after that. Each time Emmett was there. He did not engineer her visits. He did not need to. He was simply present, the way people are present in places they are drawn to, and she was learning his presence the way you learn the outline of something you've looked at enough times. The way he stood, the quality of his quiet, the slight easing that came over him when his son laughed. She was careful. She told herself she was being careful. She was not being careful at all. It was Harlan Finch who came to her at the end of the second week, after Cody had been declared fully recovered and the palace had returned to its normal rhythms, to tell her that the Alpha had arranged a formal change to her palace position. "You are to be given access to the herb stores and a dedicated workspace," Harlan said. He was looking at her carefully, in the way he often did, like a man who was used to reading situations and was reading this one with some concern. "The Alpha is designating you as a palace consultant on natural remedies. You'll continue to have kitchen quarters, but your work assignment is changing." Winnie stared at him. "That's not," she stopped. "I don't have certification. The healers will object." "They have already objected. The Alpha overruled them." She sat down on the kitchen bench slowly. "Is there a problem?" Harlan asked. "No," she said, because there wasn't. It was exactly what she had wanted in a deep and quiet part of herself that she had not let herself think too loudly. It was recognition. It was the thing her mother's work deserved, carried forward through her hands. She should have felt only glad. She did feel glad. But there was something else underneath it, something cautious and not quite comfortable, because nothing in her experience had prepared her for good things arriving without a cost. Harlan Finch was still watching her. "He's a good man," he said quietly. She looked at him. "The Alpha," Harlan said. "I've known him since we were young. He's a complicated man, but a good one. I want you to know that." A pause. "I also want you to know that there are people in this palace who will not be pleased by the changes he is making, particularly those who have held certain positions for a long time and are not accustomed to being displaced." "The healers," she said. "Among others." She heard but could not quite name the shape of what he was telling her. "Thank you, Harlan," she said. He nodded and left. She should have paid more attention to what he was telling her. She understood this later. She understood it clearly from the other side of what happened, with the specific, terrible clarity of hindsight. But the next 2 weeks were the most full she had ever lived, and she was, for the first time in 3 years, genuinely absorbed in something. Her new workspace was 2 rooms, one for storage, one for preparation, both of them with windows and morning light, both of them smelling of stone and herbs, both of them hers in a way that nothing had been hers since her mother's cottage. She worked. She also, despite herself, saw Emmett Voss. Not every day. The Alpha of Silver Ridge had a territory to run, a council to manage, a pack of several hundred wolves whose needs did not pause because his son had been ill. She understood this, and she did not seek him out. He sought her out. It was small things. An appearance in her doorway with a question about whether she could develop something for the older warriors whose joint pain had been worsening. A walk through the herb garden where she had been cataloging the palace's existing stores, where he had fallen into step beside her and asked questions, real questions, not polite ones, about what she was finding and what it could do. One evening he brought her dinner when she had clearly forgotten to eat, setting the tray down on her work table without fanfare and saying only, "Cody told me you skipped lunch again." She looked at the tray, then at him. "He's been reporting on me. He calls it keeping track." The corner of his mouth moved. She ate dinner in her workspace with the Alpha of Silver Ridge sitting on the spare stool, and they talked about the mountain fever variant and its relationship to altitude and air quality. And then somehow they were talking about her mother. And then somehow they were talking about his pack's history. And she was laughing, genuinely laughing, at something he said about a council meeting that had gone sideways over a land dispute involving 3 brothers and a goat. It was the first time she had seen him laugh too. It changed his face completely. She was in trouble and she knew it. She was choosing with full awareness to walk into trouble anyway. It was a Tuesday when she walked past the closed door of the council chamber and heard his voice inside. She had not been eavesdropping. She had been bringing a delivery of prepared medicines to the healer's corridor, which ran adjacent to the council chamber's south wall, and the voice came through the stone with that particular quality of stone-carried sound, not loud, but clear. The way sound is when everything else is quiet. She stopped because she heard her name. The Cross girl, that was Lorna McGraw. Alpha, with respect, the arrangement has created difficulties. The other healers feel their expertise has been undermined. The other healers couldn't stop my son from dying. Emmett's voice was flat. Winnie Cross did. One success, Lorna said, with an unconventional treatment that most certified healers would consider reckless. The council has concerns about the precedent. Then the council should take those concerns to the next meeting, and we'll address them there. A pause, another voice one Winnie didn't recognize, a council member presumably, male, older from the sound of it. The concern, this voice said carefully, is not only professional, it is social. The girl is a kitchen servant. She has been given a workspace, direct access to the Alpha's son, and by certain accounts, a pause. By certain accounts, an unusual degree of the Alpha's personal time. Silence. Winnie stood in the corridor and could not move. That is not the council's area, Emmett said. His voice had gone quiet in a specific way, not controlled but contained. Alpha, that was Lorna again, and her voice had gentled, become almost kind in a way that made it worse. Forgive me, but there are those who are beginning to ask, what exactly is the nature of your interest in this girl? She has no rank, no wolf, no pack standing. If you were to, she seemed to search for phrasing. If there were to be any appearance of a personal connection, the political consequences would be significant. The council would be within its rights to raise the question of your judgment. A very long silence. Winnie's hand moved to the wall beside her, her fingertips finding the stone. My judgment, Emmett said at last, has guided this pack for 12 years. It will continue to guide it. Of course, we are not questioning. What are you suggesting, Lorna? Another pause. Merely that some distance might be wise for the appearance of things. She can keep the workspace, her work is valuable, but the personal time, the visits, the familiarity, it would be better for everyone, including the girl, if the boundary were clear. Silence. Including the girl, Emmett repeated. Alpha, you know how these things look. You know what people begin to say. You know the difficulty of her position here already. Why make it harder for her? Winnie pressed her back against the wall. She listened. Emmett Voss said nothing for a long time, and then, very quietly, very finally, he said, Fine. One word. One word that closed a door. Winnie Cross stood in the corridor for another 3 seconds. Then she walked on, steady, even her face composed, the tray of medicines balanced in both hands. She did not let herself feel it until she was back in her own workroom with the door closed. Then she sat down on the floor beside the work table, and she was still for a very long time. She did not let herself be angry. Anger was a luxury she had never quite been able to afford, and she had learned, through the long years since her mother died, to feel things fully in private and then fold them away and keep moving. It was not bravery. It was survival. She sat on the floor of her workroom and she let herself feel it, the sting of it, clean and precise, like a cut from a very sharp blade. Not rage. Something quieter and harder to name. Something that felt like the answer to a question she had been afraid to ask. She had been right to be careful. She had not been careful enough. She thought about the way he had said fine, that single word in that single tone. She thought about what it cost a man like Emmett Voss to say it. She thought about what it said about him that he had said it, not a refusal, not a fight, just a quiet fine that handed the decision to someone else and called it wisdom. She did not blame him. That was the part that was hardest to sit with. She understood the position. She understood the politics. She understood that an alpha's first responsibility was his pack and his standing and the structures that held everything together, and that a kitchen girl with no wolf and no rank and no family name worth speaking was not a position he could afford to hold regardless of what had grown, quietly and without either of them planning it, in the space between dinner trays and herb gardens and the sound of his son laughing. She understood all of it. She did not blame him. And that left her with only herself and the decision that had, she realized, been waiting for her all along. She had a workspace now. She had recognized work. She had the beginning of something she had been building toward in secret since she was 14 years old. She did not need his attention to keep that. What she needed was to remember who she was before she had started waiting for the way he looked at her. She needed, she thought, to put herself back in her own hands. Harlan Finch came to her workspace the next morning. He knocked, something most people didn't bother to do, and waited for her to say, "Come in," and then he stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets, and the careful look on his face that she was beginning to understand meant he was carrying something difficult. "You heard," he said. It was not a question. "I was passing the corridor," she said. She did not look up from the preparation she was working on. "The walls are stone, sound carries." He was quiet for a moment. "Winnie." "I'm all right," she said. "You don't have to be." She considered this. "I know," a pause. "I am, though." She looked up. "I have been in worse places than this. I have had fewer resources than this. I am not leaving the workspace. I am not abandoning what I've built. I simply," she stopped, started again. "I simply needed to remember what I'm actually here for." Harlan looked at her for a long time. "What Lorna said in that room was not untrue," she said. "My position here is what it is. It is not strengthened by complications." "Emmett," he stopped. "He would not want you to feel." "I know," she said, and she did. She was not angry at Emmett. She did not want Harlan to carry something back to him that would make him feel guilty. "Please don't tell him I was in that corridor. It doesn't matter. I am going back to work. I have 3 preparations to complete before the afternoon, and the old warrior, Rufus Doolin, is coming in about his joints. I don't want him to wait." Harlan Finch stood in the doorway for another few seconds. Something in his expression was complicated in a way she didn't entirely understand. "You are a remarkable person," he said quietly. "I want you to know that I think so." She held that carefully, and then she said, "Thank you, Harlan." He left. She did not let herself sit with it again. She simply worked. But a decision had been made, in the quiet of her own interior, that she had not fully examined yet. It formed slowly over the following days, taking shape the way crystals do, not all at once but piece by piece, each thought adding to a structure that had, she was beginning to see, been inevitable from the start. Her mother's work had never been properly recorded. The preparation she had developed for the mountain fever, the one that had saved Cody Voss when 5 certified healers could not, existed only in her memory and in fragments in the kitchen's old supply ledger. If something happened to her, it vanished. That could not continue. She needed to document it properly. She needed to compile everything her mother had taught her, everything she had discovered on her own, everything she had tested and confirmed, all of it, written clearly, in a form that could be preserved and used regardless of what happened to Winnie Cross herself. And she needed to do it somewhere the work would be safe. Silver Ridge had a library. It was a good one of the best in the region. She had learned during her weeks of access to the palace's resources. If she could get her work added to the library's permanent records, it would outlast her regardless of any other circumstances. The librarian's name was Miranda Haskins. She was Pearl's younger sister, though they were nothing alike. Where Pearl was formal and carefully dignified, Miranda was small and enthusiastic, and she loved her books the way some people loved pack members, with a specific, personal devotion. Winnie went to find her. Miranda Haskins was everything Winnie had hoped for and more. She took one look at Winnie's notes, spread across the library table in Winnie's careful handwriting, and her eyes went wide. "You developed this," she said, "all of it." Based on my mother's foundation. She was Mabel Cross. There should be a record from 15 years ago, a healer's gathering. Yes. Miranda was already moving through shelves. Yes, I know the record. It was filed under traditional remedies. I've always thought it deserved better than that. She came back with a thin ledger, set it beside Winnie's notes and began comparing. Your notation system is different from hers. I adapted it. Hers was more poetic. Mine is more practical. Miranda looked up with an expression of pure delight. Can I have copies of all of this? That's what I came here for, Winnie said. They worked together for 3 afternoons, and at the end of the 3rd afternoon, Miranda looked at the completed archive and said, "This belongs in the main collection, under its proper name, not traditional remedies, under Cross method." Winnie stared at her. "It's your work," Miranda said simply. "It should be called what it is." Winnie thought about her mother, writing in the kitchen ledger because she had nowhere else to write. "Cross method," she said. "Cross method," Miranda confirmed and wrote it at the top of the page. 3 things happened in the same week. The first was that Rufus Doolin, the old warrior, 62 years old, with joints that had been worsening for a decade despite every standard treatment, came back from his 3rd session with Winnie and walked into the great hall without his cane. He had been using that cane for 4 years. He stood in the middle of the hall with tears on his face and absolutely no embarrassment about them, and when Harlan Finch asked what had happened, he said, "The Cross girl. That's what happened." The second was that Cody Voss, fully recovered and back to his normal life, began appearing at Winnie's workroom in the afternoons. He would sit on the spare stool and watch what she was doing and ask approximately 1 question per minute. She had started explaining things to him, not simplified things, real explanations, and discovered, to her genuine surprise, that he followed everything. "You're good at this," she told him one afternoon. He shrugged with the elaborate casualness of a 6-year-old who was trying not to look pleased. "I like plants. You should learn more about them." "Will you teach me?" She looked at him. "If your father agrees." "I can ask him." "Let me ask him," she said. The third thing was harder. Lorna McGraw came to her workroom. She came alone, which was notable, and she came in the evening, which was more notable. She knocked, which was most notable of all, because Lorna McGraw was not a woman who knocked on kitchen girls' doors. Winnie opened it. Lorna was 50 years old, silver-haired, carefully composed. She had lines around her eyes that spoke of long practice and the specific tiredness that came from watching people die when you couldn't stop it. She was not a bad woman. Winnie had understood that even in the worst moments. "May I come in?" Lorna asked. Winnie stepped back. Lorna entered and looked around the workroom with an expression Winnie couldn't quite categorize. Professional assessment. Something underneath it, harder to name. "Rufus Doolin's joints," she said. "Yes." "The preparation you used." "A modification of the base anti-inflammatory compound. I changed the binding agent and added 2 herbs that work specifically on calcification in older joints. It won't work on everyone, the calcification pattern matters, but for his pattern, it should hold." Lorna was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I reviewed your archive in Miranda's library." Winnie waited. "Your mother's work on the mountain fever," Lorna said. "I was at the gathering where she presented it. I was 22. I was a newly certified healer, and I was very certain about what counted as real medicine." She stopped. "I voted to file it under traditional remedies," she said. Winnie kept her face still. "I have thought about that decision many times since." Lorna sat down on the spare stool without being invited, but Winnie didn't mind. "Your mother was right. Her research was right. If we had taken it seriously, the compound would have been in the standard training for 12 years. The children who died of mountain fever in those 12 years," she stopped again. "It wasn't only your vote," Winnie said carefully. "No, but it was mine. She looked at Winnie. "I said things in the council chamber that I want to apologize for." Winnie was silent. "The things I said about your position, about the appearance of familiarity, they were not wrong politically, but they were unkind. And I said them in a room where you might be hurt by them, and I knew that, and I said them anyway." A pause. "I did not think you were listening. That does not make it better." Winnie said, "No, it doesn't." "No," Lorna looked at her hands. "I want to ask if you would consider allowing me to study your preparations, formally. I have resources you don't: laboratory access, documentation channels, connection to the healer's governing body. If your work was submitted through proper channels, it could become part of the official training curriculum." Winnie stared at her. "The mountain fever compound, the joint treatment, whatever else you have." Lorna met her eyes. "I can't undo the past 15 years, but I can help ensure the next 15 go differently." The workroom was very quiet. Winnie thought about her mother, about the kitchen ledger, about Miranda Haskins writing Cross method at the top of the page. "I would want my mother's name on it," she said. "Mabel Cross as originator, my name as developer. That is not negotiable." Lorna said, "That is entirely fair. And I want access to the healer's library. Full access, not consultant access, the same access a certified healer would have." Lorna took a breath. "That will require the council's approval." "I know." A pause. "I will advocate for it." "Then we have a starting point," Winnie said. She did not think in those weeks about leaving. She was too busy. She was too present, in a way she hadn't been since before her mother died. She was working and being seen for the work and building something real, and the ache that lived in her chest from the corridor conversation was manageable, most of the time, because she had other things to put her attention into. And then Emmett came to her workroom. He knocked. He always knocked now. She didn't know when that had started, but at some point in the past weeks it had become his habit, and the sound of it, those 2 quiet taps on the doorframe, had become something she responded to without fully meaning to. She said, "Come in." He came in. He looked tired, a different kind of tired from the sick-room exhaustion, more the familiar settled weight of a man who carried too many things and was accustomed to it. He said, "Cody told me he's been coming to see you in the afternoons." "He has," she said. "I should have cleared it with you first. I apologize." "Don't he's," Emmett stopped. "He's better since he's been coming here. Something in him is." He seemed to be searching for words that were not natural to him. "He's more himself." "He's very bright," Winnie said. "He is. He's been asking questions about plant medicine that I don't know how to answer." A pause. "He asked me if you could teach him." "I told him to let me ask you," she said. "I'm asking," Emmett said, "if you're willing." She should have said, "Of course." She should have said, "I'd be glad to." She should have kept it professional and brief and clean. Instead she said, "You know it would mean I'd be in more regular contact with him, and by extension with you." The words surprised her as much as they seemed to surprise him. A silence. "I know that," he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. And the thing that had been in the space between them, in the herb garden, in the dinner conversations, in 2 in the morning with the moon on the floor and a small boy breathing peacefully, was there again, undeniable and inconvenient and real. "The council meeting," she said. "I know." Lorna McGraw spoke sense, she said, politically. "Yes," he said. His jaw was tight. "She did." "I'm not asking you to do anything that costs you more than you can afford," she said carefully. "I know what my position is here. I have never been under any illusions about it." "Winnie," he said, very quietly. She stopped. "I said fine in that room," he said, "because I was tired and I was a coward, and Lorna McGraw was right that the political cost was real, and I told myself that protecting you from the talk meant protecting you from the cost." He stopped, started again. "I have thought about it every day since." She was very still. "What I want to say to you," he said, "requires more courage than I had that day. I am not certain I have it now. But I want you to know," he stopped again. And this time, the stopping had a different quality. Not a loss of words, but a decision about which words were actually right. "I want you to know that I see you," he said. "I see what you are, not the kitchen girl, not the alpha's son's healer. You, the person who kept her mother's life's work alive in a kitchen for 3 years because she refused to let it be forgotten. I see that." She could not say anything for a moment. "I'd like the chance," he said, "to keep seeing it properly. Not carefully managed, not politically arranged, just honestly." She thought about what it would cost. She thought about what it would cost if she said no. She said, "Teach Cody, and we'll see where the rest of it goes." Something in his face shifted, not relief exactly, but the easing of something that had been very tightly held. "Agreed," he said. The peace lasted 11 days. Winnie would count them afterward. The way you count things you didn't know were numbered until the number is complete. 11 days of Cody at the workroom in the afternoons and Emmett appearing in the early evenings, and something real and careful and unhurried beginning to form between them, not rushed, not declared, but present, building itself with the same steady patience she brought to a slow-brewed preparation. 11 days. And then Clara Doolan's assistant, a young man named Clyde Haskins, who was Miranda's nephew and therefore generally reliable, came to her workroom on the 12th morning with wide eyes and an urgent manner. "There's a situation," he said. "In the North Wing, the council has called an emergency session." Winnie set down what she was holding. "What's happened?" "3 wolves from the Bonner territory came in this morning. They've been sick for 2 weeks. High fever, not responding to anything the Bonner healers tried. 2 of them are in bad shape." He hesitated. "One of them is a child." She was already reaching for her satchel. The 3 wolves from Bonner territory were in the North Wing's infirmary. 2 adult males and a girl of perhaps 9, who was the child Clyde had mentioned, and who was in the worst shape of the 3. Winnie went through the door and went to work, and the healers who were already there, Pearl Haskins and Maybelle Bonner, whose territory these wolves had come from, watched her with expressions that had, over the past weeks, shifted from dismissal to something more complicated. This was mountain fever. The same variant, same signature, same response to the standard treatments, which was to say, no response at all. She knew it immediately. She said, "I need my workroom, 30 minutes. Pearl Haskins said, "We don't have 30 minutes for the child." "I'll start a fast preparation. The full compound will follow." She was already moving. "Keep her cool. Don't give her anything else. I need a clean body to work with." She ran, not walked, back to her workroom. She had refined the preparation since Cody's illness. She had documented every step and she knew it with her hands now, not just her mind. The way a musician knows a piece of music, in the muscle, in the breath. 18 minutes. She came back through the infirmary door with 2 clay cups and a focused calm that she had inherited from her mother, and did not know how to be without. She saved all 3 of them. The child first. Her name was Sarah, and she had her father's eyes and her mother's stubbornness, and she told Winnie 3 days into her recovery that she was going to be a healer when she grew up. Winnie told her that was a very good plan. But the Bonner wolves' arrival had done something to the palace's ecosystem that Winnie had not fully anticipated. They had come specifically asking for the kitchen girl with the mountain fever cure, not for the 5 royal healers, not for Silver Ridge's official medical resources. For her. The word kitchen girl was said with a different quality by the adults in the infirmary, by Maybelle Bonner, who had asked Winnie to explain the compound step by step while she worked, by Pearl Haskins, who had written everything down without being asked, by Emmett Voss, who had stood in the doorway the first evening with an expression that she couldn't parse and then left without interrupting. He came to find her afterward. The Bonner Alpha wants to send their own sick to Silver Ridge for treatment, he said. 3 more cases have presented in their territory. She absorbed this. I can treat 3 more. There will be more after that. The mountain fever is spreading along the trade routes. 3 other packs have sent messages this week. She sat with this. The compound is documented, she said. In the library it can be taught. The healers, she stopped. Lorna McGraw asked to study it formally. She has laboratory access. She could train others. Yes, he said. He was watching her. That is the practical answer. But 3 different alphas have specifically asked for you. He paused. Not for the treatment, for you. They've heard what happened with Cody, with Rufus, now with the Bonner Wolves. They want the person, not just the preparation. She looked at the empty clay cups on her work table. I'm a kitchen girl, she said, not defensively, just nomming the reality. You were, he said. I'm not certain that's an accurate description anymore. She looked at him. The council met this morning, he said. Lorna McGraw advocated, as she told you she would. There is a formal certification process. It's been expedited before for extraordinary circumstances. The vote was 12-3 in favor of initiating it. Winnie went very still. The process takes 3 months, he continued, during which time you would be assessed by the healer's governing body. Your documentation, your preparations, your case records, your methods. He paused. At the end of it, if they approve, and I believe they will, you would hold a full healer's certification with a specialization in botanical medicine. The Cross method would be part of the official curriculum within a year. She could not say anything. Your mother's work, he said quietly, properly named, properly placed. She had to look away. She looked at the window, at the pale afternoon sky above the mountain valley, at the same light that came through the windows of the great hall every afternoon and turned everything gold. It came through her window, too. She had not noticed that before. Emmett, she said. Yes. Thank you. Don't thank me, he said. It's yours. It was always yours. I simply made some noise in the right direction. She looked back at him. He was watching her with an expression she had learned to read in the past weeks, open, present, careful without being closed. The expression of a man who was choosing, each time, to keep seeing something clearly. There's something else, he said. She waited. The council also discussed other things related to my personal affairs. He stopped, started again, the way he sometimes did when the right words were resisting him. I am not a man who does things halfway. I want you to know that. When I said I wanted to see you properly, I meant it as more than a present arrangement. She felt her heart do something she had no name for. I know my position creates complications, he said. I know yours does too. I know the politics of this are not simple, and I am not asking you to decide anything today. But I want you to know what I intend, what I hope for, if you're willing to consider it. She said, you are very careful with words for a man who doesn't like uncertainty. The corner of his mouth moved. I'm trying to say it correctly. You're saying it correctly, she said. Then, she thought of the corridor, the word fine, the 11 days, the clay cups and the child named Sarah and the library archive with her mother's name at the top. She thought about what her mother had told her once, near the end. A healer's job is not to overpower what is broken. It is to give back what was lost. I need to pass the certification first, she said. He accepted this without flinching. Of course. And if I do, she said, then we can talk about the rest of it. When, he said very quietly, not if. She looked at him. You will pass it, he said. I have no doubt of that. She held that certainty, the specific, uncomplicated nature of it, the way it asked nothing of her in return, and let it settle somewhere it could stay. Go away, she said. I have preparations to start. He smiled. full and genuine and startling the way it always was. "Good night, Winnie," he said. "Good night, Emmett." He left. She stood in her workroom for a moment in the gold afternoon light, and she allowed herself, briefly, to feel the full weight of the past 3 weeks, the grief and the hope and the work and the fear and the small, stubborn, persistent thing that had taken root without her permission and she was beginning to accept, not going anywhere. Then she went back to work. The certification process began on a Monday. The first assessor was a woman named Stefania Voss, no relation to Emmett, a coincidence of surnames, who arrived from the regional healers governing body with a leather case full of assessment forms and an expression of practiced neutrality. She was perhaps 45, precise and thorough, and she spent the first day doing nothing but reading Winnie's documentation. At the end of the day, she said, "This is the most rigorously documented botanical archive I have seen from a self-trained practitioner." "My mother was thorough," Winnie said. "And you built on her thoroughness. The case records are particularly strong." She closed the last folder. "I have questions. We'll begin in earnest tomorrow." The questions were hard. They were exactly as hard as Winnie had expected, and harder than she had feared in some places. Not because she didn't know the answers, but because the format of academic assessment was different from the format of knowing because you have done it, and translating between the two was its own skill. But she had her mother's precision and her own years of practice, and she answered everything she could and was clear about the boundaries of what she could not answer. Stefania Voss seemed to appreciate the clarity about the limits. "Most practitioners overstate their knowledge in assessment settings," she said at the end of the second day. "You do not." "My mother said that overstating was how people got hurt," Winnie said. "Your mother was right." Lorna McGraw sat in on 3 of the assessment days. She sat quietly in the corner with her hands folded and her expression attentive, and she did not speak unless Stefania directed a question to her. On the 4th day, when Stefania asked her to describe her experience of Winnie's mountain fever treatment, Lorna said, "I have been a practicing healer for 28 years. I have seen mountain fever cases that we lost because we did not have the Cross method available. In my professional opinion, Winnie Cross's contribution to botanical medicine is not incremental. It is significant, and it should have been recognized 15 years ago when her mother first presented the foundational research." A silence. Stefania was writing something. Lorna looked at Winnie. Winnie held her gaze and nodded once small. The 5th and 6th healers, Pearl Haskins and Maybelle Bonner, who had now observed 3 sets of mountain fever cases, submitted their assessments in writing. Both were formal and thorough. Both were positive. Pearl Haskins wrote, "The Cross method is reproducible, effective, and grounded in documented botanical science. I recommend full recognition." Maybelle Bonner wrote, "I was wrong about her initially. I want that in the record." Clara Doolin came to Winnie's workroom on the evening of the 10th day. She was the eldest of the 5, 63, still sharp, with the specific weight of someone who had been the best at something for a long time and knew it. She sat down without being invited, the way she had before, and she looked at her hands for a moment. "I am going to give a favorable assessment," she said. Winnie waited. "I want you to know that this is not easy for me," Clara said. "Not because of you, because of what it means about how I have practiced medicine, the things your mother knew, the things you knew. If we had been paying attention, if I had been paying attention, we would have seen it." She looked up. "A healer's purpose is to heal. I allowed other things to matter more than that." Winnie said carefully, "I don't think you're an unkind person." "No," Clara said, "I think I am a proud one, proud enough that a kitchen girl's knowledge was easy to dismiss." She was quiet. "That is a failure. It is my failure." She stood. "You will pass this assessment. You deserve to pass it. I want you to know that I will not stand in the way of what comes after." What comes after? Winnie asked. Clara Doolin gave her a dry, direct look that held, around the edges, the ghost of a smile. Do not be obtuse, she said. This palace has been watching the alpha and a very determined young woman for the past month. What comes after is entirely obvious. She left. Winnie stared at the door. Then she laughed, a genuine, surprised laugh, the kind that comes when reality proves more human than expected. The result of the certification assessment came on a Thursday. Stephania Voss presented it in the palace library, with Miranda Haskins present because Miranda had requested to be and Stephania had seen no reason to refuse, and with Harlan Finch present as the Alpha's representative, and with several other people present for reasons that were probably political, and that Winnie was trying not to think about. She stood in the library that had her mother's name in its archives, and listened to Stephania Voss read the assessment summary. Winnie Cross has demonstrated exceptional competency in botanical medicine, specifically in the areas of fever treatment, anti-inflammatory preparation, and systematic documentation of traditional knowledge. Her methods are reproducible and evidence-based. Her case records show a consistent success rate that meets or exceeds the standard for formal certification. The panel recommends full certification in botanical medicine, with a specialization designation in mountain fever treatment and related fever variants. The Cross method is recommended for immediate inclusion in the regional healers training curriculum. Furthermore, the panel recommends that the foundational research of Mabel Cross be formally reclassified from traditional remedy to primary research and archived accordingly. Miranda Haskins made a sound that was very close to a sob. She covered her mouth with both hands and her eyes were bright. Winnie stood very still. Mabel Cross, she thought, primary research, properly placed. She thought about her mother sitting at the kitchen table in their mountain cottage, writing by lamplight with the careful precision of someone who believed, despite all evidence to the contrary, that the work mattered. It mattered. It had always mattered. Now it was in the record. She did not cry until she was alone. She was in her workroom, the door closed, the preparations on the table untouched, and she sat on the floor beside the work table the way she had sat the night she heard Emmett say fine in the council chamber. And this time the feeling was completely different, but it landed in the same place, that soft central place behind the ribs where things that are too large to process go to wait. She pressed her back against the table and let it come, quietly, without drama, the way she did most things. Her mother had been right. Every herb she had pressed into Winnie's memory, every formula she had explained and re-explained and tested, until the understanding was in Winnie's hands as well as her mind. Every morning she had gotten up before dawn to walk the mountain paths and identify what was growing and where. All of it right. All of it real. All of it now in the record, where it would stay. After a while she stopped crying and sat quietly in the afternoon light, and she felt, for perhaps the first time since she was 14 years old, like she was fully in the right place. Emmett came that evening. He knocked. She said, "Come in." He entered and looked at her face. She had been crying and she hadn't bothered to hide the evidence of it, because she was past the point of hiding things from him, and his expression went very still. "Good news or bad?" he said quietly. "The best," she said. "Certified, full designation. The Cross method is going into the curriculum. My mother's research is reclassified." Something in his face went soft and quick and then steadied. "Good," he said, and the word was so loaded with something she could not name that it sat in the room between them for a full 3 seconds before either of them spoke again. She stood up. She was not quite steady. The emotions of the day had taken more out of her than she'd realized, and he crossed the room in 2 strides and caught her elbow, steadying her with a hand that was careful and firm. She looked up at him. He was very close. His eyes were dark and direct and present, the way they always were when the formality fell away. "We said," she managed, "that we would talk about the rest of it after the certification." "We did," he said. "I passed." "You did." She took a breath. "Then I suppose we should talk." Or, he said very quietly, "we could decide that some things don't need as many words as we've been giving them." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she leaned forward and rested her forehead against his chest. Just that, just the small weight of her forehead against the solid warmth of him, and felt his hand move from her elbow to her back, settling there with a gentleness that was more than she'd expected from a man built like the mountains around this palace. They stood like that for a minute, or maybe longer. "You are the most stubborn, capable person I have ever met," he said, quietly into the top of her head. "You're not bad yourself," she said, "for an alpha." She felt more than heard, the laugh that moved through his chest. The council meeting was called for the following Monday. Not the full council, 8 members, the senior ones, the ones whose opinions mattered most to the political balance of Silver Ridge's relationships with neighboring packs. They met in the evening after the formal session, and Winnie was not invited. She found out what happened in it from Harlan Finch, who came to her workroom the next morning with that careful look she knew well by now. "You should know what was said," he told her. "Tell me." 3 council members formally objected to any further change in your status. Not the certification, they accepted that because the governing body's authority supersedes theirs. But the question of, he paused, of the personal matter between you and Emmett. She kept her face still. What did they say? That a kitchen girl, they used that phrase specifically, could not be considered a serious prospect for an alpha's mate, that the pack would not accept it, that neighboring packs would use it as grounds to question Emmett's judgment. Harlan's voice was steady, but something underneath it was not. "Councilman Emmett, the senior one, not." "I know who you mean." He said that your lack of wolf made it impossible, that a human woman, however skilled, could not serve the pack's needs. Winnie absorbed this. "What did Emmett say?" she asked. Harlan was quiet for a moment. "He said," Harlan told her carefully, "she has already served this pack's needs better than anyone in this room. My son is alive because of her. My warriors move without pain because of her. The mountain fever cases from 3 territories were resolved because of her. If the question is what this woman can offer Silver Ridge, I would suggest you have already seen the answer." And then he said, Harlan stopped. "What did he say?" "He said, I am not asking for your approval. I am informing you of my intention. That is the appropriate order of things." Winnie sat very still. "The 3 objectors did not respond," Harlan said. "The other 5 said nothing against it." He looked at her. "I thought you should hear it from me before you heard it from someone else." She said, "He told the council." "Yes." "Without asking me first." Yes." Harlan looked briefly uncertain. "He should have." "No," she said, and the word came out softer than she intended because what she felt was not anger. "No, it's all right, She stopped. "I want to hear it from him." She found him in the herb garden. He was there because Cody had a lesson, and Cody had dragged him along. And Cody was crouched at the far end of the garden examining something in the soil with the focused intensity of a child who has discovered a genuine interest. And Emmett was standing near the garden wall watching his son with that particular expression that made something in Winnie's chest always do the same thing. He heard her come through the gate. He turned. She looked at him. "You told the council," she said. "Yes." "Before telling me." "Yes." He met her eyes without flinching. "I understand if that's." "It's fine," she said. And this time, unlike the time she had stood in the corridor and heard him say fine with that contained, careful quality, her fine was a different thing entirely. "I just wanted to hear your voice saying it." He was quiet for a moment. "My intention," he said, is to ask you to stand beside me, as my mate, if you are willing." Cody, at the far end of the garden, had found whatever he was looking at and was examining it with both hands. He was not looking at them. Whether this was deliberate, given that he was 6 and quite perceptive, was unclear. "Your counsel has concerns," she said. "My counsel will adapt," he said. "Your pack has already accepted you," he said. "Rufus Doolin told the Warrior Hall last week that you were the best healer Silver Ridge had ever had. He is not a subtle man. There are now approximately 70 wolves who would defend your honor on that basis alone." The corner of his mouth moved. "And my son will be insufferable about it." She looked across the garden at Cody, who had looked up and was watching them both with bright, calculating eyes and the deliberate innocence of a child who absolutely knows what is happening. She looked back at Emmett. "Yes," she said. One word, simple and complete. He closed the distance between them and took both her hands in his, and his grip was careful and firm and warm, and she felt it go all the way through her. "About time," said Cody loudly from the other end of the garden. The announcement was made to the full pack 3 days later. Winnie stood beside Emmett in the great hall, the same hall whose light had never reached the kitchen quarters, whose windows she had heard about but never stood at, and felt the assembled pack of Silver Ridge looking at her. She had expected many things from that moment. She had prepared for many things. She was, after all, a woman who prepared. She had not prepared for the sound that moved through the hall when Emmett announced her name and her designation. It was not a cheer. It was not silence either. It was something in between, a wave of sound that was recognition, surprised and then genuine, the way a crowd sounds when it sees something it knows to be true even if it didn't expect to. Rufus Doolin started it. Of course he did. He put both hands together and the sound rang through the hall, and then it spread, and the sound of it was enough that Winnie had to concentrate very carefully on keeping her face composed. The 3 council members who had objected sat with their hands in their laps. Lorna McGraw was clapping. Pearl Haskins was clapping. Miranda Haskins was crying and clapping simultaneously. Clara Doolin, the eldest, the proudest, the one who had said "do not be obtuse," raised her chin and put her hands together with the precise, measured approval of someone who has decided something is correct and means it. Winnie felt Emmett's hand at the small of her back, steady and present. She looked at him. He looked at her. "All right," he said, low enough that only she heard it. "All right," she said. The Cross method became part of the regional healers training curriculum 6 months later. The formal documentation included, on its first page, the acknowledgement it should have had 15 years ago. Foundational research, Mabel Cross Mountain Healer, development and clinical application, Winnie Cross Silver Ridge Pack Healer's designation in botanical medicine. 3 more mountain fever outbreaks occurred in the territories connected by the trade routes over the following year. All 3 were resolved. No deaths. Stefania Voss submitted a paper to the healers' governing body, recommending that the standard curriculum be reviewed for other potential gaps. Traditional or regional knowledge that had been filed under remedy rather than research and deserved reconsideration. The paper was accepted. Cody Voss grew up. He had his father's determination and his mother's, because Winnie was his mother, formally and truly, from the day she joined the pack as Emmett's mate Precision. He became, at 16, one of the youngest students ever accepted into the Regional Healers program. He specialized in botanical medicine. He credited Winnie in every paper he submitted, which she told him was unnecessary, and he told her that she had once told him that overstating knowledge was how people got hurt, and that the opposite, understating who had given you what you knew, was its own kind of failure. She could not argue with that. The satchel was still there. Winnie kept it in her workroom, not on the shelf, not displayed, but accessible. Her mother's satchel, with the herbs that had long since been replaced, but the smell of which had never entirely left the leather. Her mother's handwriting in the margins of the documents it carried. She touched it sometimes, when she was working alone in the quiet. Not for comfort. She didn't need comfort the way she once had. The absence in her chest had filled in over the years with work and family and the specific, grounded satisfaction of a life that was her own. She touched it to remember. To tell it you were right, it mattered, it matters still. There is a thing that happens to knowledge when it is finally set free. It grows. Not in the way of things that are forced, not with urgency or effort or the strained quality of something trying to outrun its own disappearance. It grows the way mountains grow, imperceptibly from the inside, reshaping the landscape around it without ever appearing to rush. Mabel Cross had spent her life walking mountain paths and learning what grew where and why. She had brought children through illnesses that the formal books did not name. She had sat beside dying wolves and found, in the materials of the world around her, something that could help. She had presented what she knew to people with the authority to recognize it, and they had thanked her politely and filed it away. She had gone home and kept working anyway. Because a healer's purpose, she had told her daughter, is not to be recognized. It is to heal. The recognition is for the people who come after, for the children who will not die of mountain fever because someone wrote it down, for the old warriors who will move without pain because someone paid attention, for the next girl in the next kitchen who looks at a plant and understands what it can do and does not have to start from nothing because the knowledge is already there, waiting. The recognition is for the future. The healing is for now. Winnie Cross understood this. She had understood it since she was 14, though at 14 she had not had words for it. She had understood it in the way her hands moved through herbs, in the way she listened to symptoms with the full weight of her attention, in the way she documented everything not for herself but for whoever came after. She understood it the night Cody's fever broke, when she had sat on the floor of her workroom and let herself feel the relief before going back to work. She understood it the day Lorna McGraw said, "I'm sorry," and the day Clara Doolin said, "Do not be obtuse," and the day Miranda Haskins wrote Cross Method at the top of the page. She understood it in the herb garden, when Emmett had taken both her hands and Cody had announced from the far end that it was about time. She understood it every morning when she unlocked the workroom door and the light came through the window, the same light that blazed through the great hall's tall windows, reaching everywhere, not stopping at walls. The last mountain fever outbreak she personally treated was in her 42nd year. A pack from the far north sent 3 wolves, 2 adults, and a girl of 11, who had been traveling for 5 days to reach Silver Ridge, because they had heard about the healer who had the cure. The girl's name was Kimberly Doolin. She had dark eyes and a stubborn jaw, and she held Winnie's gaze with the particular steadiness of someone who had decided that being afraid was not going to help them, and so they were choosing not to be. Winnie recognized something. She sat beside the girl and began the preparation and said, "Your wolf is strong. I can see it." The girl blinked. "How can you see that?" "Healers learn to look," Winnie said. "Your mother was a healer." "My grandmother." Something moved in the girl's face. "She died before I was born." "What was her name?" Glenda Doolin." "I would like to hear about her," Winnie said. "While the medicine works, tell me about Glenda." The girl looked at her for a moment. Then she began to talk. And Winnie listened, the way she had learned to listen, the way her mother had taught her to listen, with everything, with patience, with the understanding that the person in front of you was the most important information available. The fever broke in 7 hours. Kimberly Doolin left Silver Ridge 3 days later, healthy and whole, with a copy of the Cross Method documentation that Winnie had pressed into her hands and told her to study. Why? The girl asked. Because you have good hands, Winnie said, and your grandmother sounds like a woman who would want her knowledge to keep moving. The girl held the papers carefully, the way you hold something you have understood the weight of. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, Winnie said. Go learn and teach someone else when it's time. Emmett found her in the garden that evening. He still came to find her in the garden after all these years, or she came to find him, or they found each other in the natural way of people who have built a life together and know where the other person tends to be. He sat beside her on the garden wall and looked at the valley below, gold in the evening light. The dueling girl left well, he said. She left with the documentation. She'll be a healer. You said that about Cody, too. I said it about Cody because it was true. She looked at him. The years had made him quieter in some ways and more present in others. The harshness had been worn down, not away, but into something with different edges, the way stone gets shaped by long water. How's your knee? The preparation is working. Don't tell me it's working. Tell me the swelling is down. The swelling is down, he said obediently. She put her hand over his on the garden wall. His fingers turned and held hers without thought, the automatic ease of two people who have held each other's hands enough times that the gesture has become its own kind of language. Below them, the valley held the last of the day's light. I think about her sometimes, Winnie said. My mother, sitting at her table writing things down, not knowing if it would ever matter. It matters, he said. I know, she leaned her shoulder against his. I just like to remember that she didn't know, she did it anyway. He was quiet for a moment. She raised someone who does the same thing. She turned to look at him. He was looking back at her with that expression, the one that was not soft exactly, but open, present. The expression she had first seen in a sick room over a small boy's feverish head, when his defenses were genuinely down and the real man underneath showed through. She had seen it every day since. It had never stopped being what it was. She raised someone who does the same thing, he said again. That's a good legacy. The best one she could have given me, Winnie said. They sat on the garden wall until the light was gone from the valley and the first stars came out over the mountain, and the palace behind them was warm and lit from within. And somewhere inside it, their son was reading a healer's textbook by lamplight and planning, in the meticulous way he had always planned, what he would do next. And that is the story of Winnie Cross, kitchen girl, daughter of Mabel Cross, healer of Silver Ridge, and the woman who brought back the cure. 5 royal healers failed. 1 kitchen girl, who had never been allowed to be called a healer, did not. Not because she was exceptional in the way the stories mean when they say exceptional, but because her mother taught her to pay attention, because she kept her mother's knowledge alive in a kitchen for 3 years when she had nowhere else to put it, because when a child was dying and everyone else had stepped back, she stepped forward, because she could not think of a reason not to. That is what courage looks like most of the time. Not fearless, not flawless. Just a reason that is bigger than the fear. Thank you for being here, my beautiful family and friends. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, and I'll be back with another story just as full of heart as this one. Until next time.